Hey guys, I'm Dave,
And I'm Len.
and welcome to War Game Chat. Today we're going to talk about some of the major differences between 1970s war games and maybe a little bit of the early 80s. We'll see that and modern war games because there's been quite a bit of evolution since then. I'd say the first evolution is, God, the counters are so much better now than they used to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, you still get the half-inch counters once in a while, but typically the artwork on them is fantastic, and the numbers are big enough where you can read them without a magnifying glass. That's my biggest complaint about the 1970s is the tiny counters with they're really difficult to read with really small writing on them.
Okay. We were playing Cyborg, which is from 1977. And I always say, I'm very forgivable for old games from the 70s because basically they didn't know what they were doing half the time. So to get a decent product is a major achievement.
Well, there were some really good ones from them, like what was that? Battlefleet Mars. What was that from SPI that you brought over here? We played that game was fantastic.
Yeah, because I think that was 79, 80. That's when it was Ares.
It was probably 1970. Well, it was from SPI. It was an SPI flat pack, so probably late 70s.
Yeah, okay, flat pack, yeah. So actually, that was very good.
Actually, most of those flat packs were good. There were some that were excellent, but most of them were good.
Yeah, I was thinking there was one designer they had in SPI called John Young, and he died about 77, 78. So he was like one of the first designers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things like I'm not sure what he meant by this,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like when I play his games, there tends to be like a personal errata. Like, okay, we can allow this and we can allow that, and was it they had one about the Operation Sea Lion, and he's very vague about. It seems like there's no difference between a narrow front invasion or a wide front, because that's what the Germans were thinking about, which is best. Because it seemed like the effect was the same. It's just that actually the narrow front was worse for the Germans because the British could bottle them in.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, sorry.
So unless there's like rules and restriction for the British, see, I was thinking unless there's rules for restrictions on how many units the British can move, you can easily land at Brighton and just move in a little bit and just stay there. So.
Next thing, big difference is the maps. God, the maps are better now. I mean, back in the 70s, there were some maps that were extremely functional, and I mean, they worked well with the game, but there was never many colors on it and stuff, and artwork was simple. It's not like now. I mean, some of these maps now are practically photographic quality, but my biggest complaint about the 70s is the outer space games that use blue naval maps. I know you guys have heard this in the past, and many of you have commented and given me all the excuses for why there were blue naval maps. Well, here's the deal. Remember this little thing called movie theaters? And they had the posters out front advertising the movies. They were often photographic quality. Many of them were printed in black. Well, those cost less than $1 to manufacture, so back then. So I mean, they could have manufactured on poster material or something, but I mean, just to have reuse a blue sea map, I'll never get over that. I'm sure people are going to comment in and chew me out for not liking that, but well, I still don't like the blue naval maps.
Well, I was thinking we haven't forget the other game company, the Avalon Hill Game Company, and how the rules at times can get confusing. And they never liked to, it took a while for them to admit that you play on hexagons, not squares. You play on a gridded map, hexagon map called and the squares. Mm-hmm. That always baffled us.
Yeah.
We thought there was something.
Well, a lot of times the hexes, people they just refer to them as squares. Everyone knows what you're talking about. They know you actually mean a hex, but...
but supposedly Avalon Hill was very good at answering all sorts of game questions. In fact, a lot of times they have in the game like a separate sheet, like, can I do this and that? Can these units cross the river without a movement penalty? Yes. or, and things like that. Can cavalry retreat through?
Yeah, I remember the little cards they had in there. If you have a rules question, send a letter to here and phrase it where it could be answered with either one sentence or a yes or no answer. And basically just send them self-addressed stamped envelope with a letter, and eventually you get your response.
And I usually, it's too cheap for by stamp, so I usually just made up my own rules, my own interpretation. I found out that sometimes if you had another person with the Avalon Hill game, he had the same thing. So we sometimes debate on whether or not combat is doubled when you're defending a river line or not.
Those Avalon Hill games, though, were so well designed, it's like it was pretty rare that you had a question about them. I mean, they really play tested them and worked through them before releasing them.
Well, they're saying that the ones in the early 60s, the playtester was like about a couple guys playing it a couple times. And but then, as they got more popular, getting game testers was easier. So
that's one thing about the 1970s. I would have a lot of the modern wargame designers are going to get mad at me and probably unsubscribe for me saying this, but the rule books were more accurate back then than they are now. I mean, significantly. I mean, don't get me wrong, you do have a few 1970s rule books that were kind of a disaster, but it's not like it is now where you have so many rule books where you read them and you have tons of questions and there's conflicting information in there and stuff, and you kind of wonder, it's like, who play tested this? It's like, well, how did they not see that these two rules conflict and stuff? So...
Yeah. Jim Dunnigan was talking about SVI. They used to have game test night every Friday night. And with some families, this is where they dropped off their teenage sons, and the SVI was their babysitters. Because, this is New York City. It's very dangerous out there. So they thought that the junior would be safer with the SVI game
test club. That's kind of a good idea. Maybe these modern companies should do that. Get together with their local game shop or something, and whatever they're working on, once a month, have people come in and play it and see if there's any problems. But that's not. I mean, that's just actual. You're play testing the game there, but you're not play testing the rules because the people haven't read the rules. I mean, you have to have someone who blindly reads the rules and then tries to play the game, and then you watch him and you see everything he didn't understand, or he comes back to you with questions and stuff too.
Well, he was saying that at times you had to watch people because sometimes they didn't quite understand that. You cannot move your units over the blue ocean. Your tanks do not cross water, cross oceans. And once you get, you had to be careful. And sometimes they would change the rules on their own just for the hell of it, or just the way they thought the things should be done.
One other thing about the rule books. There is one thing better about modern rule books than the 1970s rule books is oftentimes the modern rule books will have examples of play to help you learn the game, and oftentimes that's the only way I'm able to figure out some of the conflicting rules is by reading the example of play. So that's one thing that's better about the modern rule books than the old ones.
Yeah. So that's true. And of course, the old games from the 70s usually didn't have cards or funny dice.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you did have a few card games from back then, like Battle Line Naval War, which became Avalon Hill Naval War and stuff. That had cards. But I noticed the few in the 70s and early 80s that did have cards, some of them had good cards, like Naval War, but you had some where you had that stuff where you had with the perforations, and you'd have to pull out these perforated cards, and they come on like 8.5 by 11 sheets and stuff, and that's no fun.
I was thinking Source of the Nile was one of the few, and they had ones.
One of the few what?
Games that had cards. And what it is that, well, first of all, you had a number which represents how much money you could raise for your expedition. And then you had some kind of event, like if you're camping on a veldt, the elephant stampeded your camp on the veldt. Roll for the survival table, and you had 1 in 6 chance of dying instantly. I mean, you're going so well. And there are also people get sick and all sorts of bad things.
Another thing, major difference between 1970s war games and modern war games is the price. They were expensive in the 70s, though, for the time. I mean, like a micro game costs like $5 or something. And back then, $5 was actually worth something.
Well, I was thinking the first Avalon Hill games I got were $10. And the prevailing wage, if you were making like $2 an hour, you know, like a high school student, high school graduate, if you're making $2 an hour, you're doing, you know, pretty decent. So that's 5 hours of work to buy the game. Now, I was just looking at some games. I think there's one I looked at. It was like $65. Okay, if you're making $15 $15 an hour, with everything taken out, you probably got $12. Okay, 5 hours, 6 hours. Okay, actually, I think games have kept up with inflation, but games were always expensive.
Yeah, right. They were expensive even in the 70s. And like SPI, their micro games they made back then, I don't know, I think they charged like $5 or $6 or something, and they like lost money on every one. It actually cost more to manufacture than the $6 they were selling it for. They really needed an in-house printer or something.
Yeah, and that's true.
Modern games, though, I mean, they just keep getting higher and higher. I mean, you got games now that are over $100 and stuff.
Yeah.
There's not too many you can get for $60 anymore. It seems like most of them cost more than $60.
Well, yeah, that's the box games.
Yeah.
And I don't know. What is it? Precision Games have these folio games. They're around like $12, $15.
No, those are like 20-some now. Yeah.
Now they're up to like $20.
Yeah.
But still, that's 2 hours of work to buy one.
Yeah, their mini games are like around $15.
So, and of course, we were talking about the micro games in the 70s. And again, that's about 2 hours of work. So.
Yeah.
Of course, I always thought the big one was the original Dungeons and Dragons. $10. You got a thin cardboard box. You have 3 booklets. You didn't even have any dice in it. And
I mean, that was a reasonable price back then for that $10.
Well, there were a few people who looked at it. Avalon Hill gives you a mounted map and 80 counters, and what's this? At the time, people were shocked. They weren't quite sure what this was that they bought. And if you had to play with miniatures, which of course you had to buy and paint yourself. So
I mean, now a modern D&D book costs, I think, between $49.99 and $59.99 for just one book. So
yeah. But yeah, actually, it's strange that now I think tabletop games are better than ever.
Yeah, they are better than ever now. They're not perfect, but they are better than ever.
Yeah, they've learned a lot, and even with computer games and all the first shooter games, you still get the value with tabletop games. So.
Yeah, one thing about the 1970s is not many people. In the late 1970s, there were computers, and I think even the Atari VCS, also known as the 2600, existed. But most people didn't have those in the late 1970s, so there's a lot of games that would have been done nowadays would have been a video game, you know what I mean? But back then they were all done as tabletop games because most people had no other way to play the game and stuff.
Yeah. So there are some good 1970s games.
Oh, there's plenty of 1970s games that are good. Plenty. There's new mechanics used in modern war games that weren't used in the 1970s, so that's one of the pluses of modern war games, and they've learned quite a bit now from mistakes of the past.
I got nothing else.
Yeah, that's all I got, guys. We'll have something new for you next week. Have a good one.
All right.